I'm a little shy right now because I'm afraid you all are going to. All right, well, thank you. Well, yes, that works. It works. From Rev Jeremiah Wright's sermon, God and Government. We confuse government and God. Let me tell you something. We believe in this country, and we teach our children that God sent us to this promised land. God sent us to take this country from the Arawak, the Susquehanna, the Apache, the Comanche, the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Hopi, and the Arapaho. We confuse government and God. We believe God sanctioned the rape and robbery of an entire continent. We believe God ordained African slavery. We believe God makes Europeans superior to Africans and superior to everybody else too. We confuse God and government. We said in our founding document as a government, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Created, that means God. And endowed with a certain inalienable right, that means given by God. And then we define Africans in those same documents as 3/5 of a person. We believe God approved of African slavery. We believe God approved segregation. We believe God approved apartheid. And the document says all men are created more equal than other men. And we're talking about white men. We confuse God and government. We believe that God approves of 6% of the people on the face of this earth, controlling all the resources on the face of this earth, while the other 94% live in poverty and squalor. While we give trillions of dollars of tax breaks to the white rich. We believe God was a founding member of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Look at the lily whiteness of the G7 nations the next time you see a picture, and you tell me if you see anything wrong with that picture when you hold it up against a picture of the color of the world's population. We believe God is on the side of the wealthy. We confuse God and government.
Thank you, Alice. And give me a little volume, Elena. This next reading by Rev Jeremiah Wright I think you need a mute over here. I'm running sound up here. This next reading by Rev Jeremiah Wright is a little call response, so you'll have to listen closely. Governments lie. Hold on. And that was Thornell of all people. I'll let you know. You'll hear when it's time. Governments lie. This government lied about their belief that all men were created equal. The truth was, they believe all white men were created equal. The truth is, they did not believe that even white women were created equal in creation nor in civilization. The government had to pass an amendment to the Constitution to get white women the vote. Then the government had to pass an equal rights amendment to get equal protection under the law for women. The government still thinks a woman has no right over her own body. Governments lie. Government lied about Nelson Mandela, and our CIA helped put him in prison and keep him there for 27 years. The South African government lied on Nelson Mandela. Governments lie. Turn to your neighbor and say again, governments lie. Governments lie. The government lied about the Tuskegee experiment. They purposely infected African American men with syphilis. But where governments lie, God does not lie. And God's truth shows that governments change. Long before there was a red, white, and blue colonization, the Egyptian government was doing colonization. They colonized half the continent of Africa. They colonized parts of the Mediterranean. All colonizers ain't white. Turn to your neighbor and say, oppressors come in all colors. But while the government of Egypt and Pharaoh ran it, they don't run a thing today. And why? Because governments change. The British government used to rule from east to west. She colonized Kenya, Nigeria, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Hong Kong. Her navies ruled the seven seas all the way down to the tip of Argentina in the Falklands. The Japanese government failed, the German government failed, and the United States of American government, when it comes to treating her citizens of Indian descent fairly, she failed. She put them on reservations. When it came to treating her citizens of Japanese descent fairly, she failed. She put them in internment prison camps. When it came to treating her citizens of African descent fairly, America failed. She put them in chains. The government put them in slave quarters and put them on auction blocks and put them in cotton fields, put them in inferior schools, put them in substandard housing, put them in scientific experiments. The government gives them drugs and builds bigger prisons and passes a three-strike law and then wants us to say, God bless America. No, 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 not God bless America. God damn America for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating her citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she keeps trying to act like she is God and she is supreme. Well, Darrel Nash told me to make you uncomfortable, so am I doing a good job, Darrel? Where are you? Where are you, Darrel? All right. This sermon is dedicated to you. You've been a longtime member, devoted, generous member of this church. It does me honor to be able to share these words for you, and I hope I do you justice. I hope I honor you by these words. That was 2008. Say now you're like, well, he doesn't preach to. Compared to Jeremiah Wright, man, Rev John's pretty mellow. He's pretty mellow. You can handle it. I know you're going to be uncomfortable, but you can handle it. It was 2008. That was Jeremiah Wright, Barack Obama's pastor, and they were at odds. Many of you all know the story. You remember this? Obama was a leading candidate for the Democratic Party for president. He and his family had been attending Trinity United Church of Christ, pretty liberal church. Jeremiah Wright had one of the few all-black United Church of Christ churches in the country in Chicago, and that's where the Obamas worshiped for more than a decade. And the media got a hold of Jeremiah Wright saying, "Goddamn America," and they played it on an endless loop. They were trying to do damage to his run for presidency. They didn't give it much context. Today you've been given more context than anybody back then. And what did Obama do? He denounced Wright's words, saying they were derogatory and created more division in the country. He broke ties with his pastor and then gave a national speech titled A More Perfect Union, which came to be known as the Obama's race speech. I will share some of his words in a moment. When you are black or brown and participating in dominant culture, there are times when you feel like you're forced to choose between being accepted by either side. There is a strange culture game that is played where you have to be white enough to fit in and black enough to be accepted. It happens all the time. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And when you try to be fair to both sides, some never seem to be satisfied with what you say or do. It's like chasing a carrot. And Obama was familiar with chasing carrots as a mixed-race person who presented as black. Now he's running for national office, which meant he had to be very careful with his words, lest he be judged as a radical leftist or a black nationalist. Of course, he was neither. If you read his books, you know he's always been a moderate person, a center-left person. He and I share that approach. But that was the game he was in, the game of politics. And Wright would later say, quote, Obama's a politician, I'm a prophet. These are two different dispensations. And it was complex. And it caused many of Obama's supporters stress. But the thing is, it's not a game. Reverend Wright's sermon spoke some hard truths that I think most of us who know history agree with him. Subjugation, colonization, slavery, second and third class citizenship. He wasn't wrong. God for Wright encompasses all that is good, humane, and loving. His God did not play favorites with culture or race. God for him was a God of justice, equity, and compassion. Sounds familiar. This is what he means when he say that God doesn't lie. His God was a God of love. God doesn't lie. The truth or essence of humanity for him is made by love for love. But too often, we've all been subject to the tyranny of the minority, the few dominating the many. Reverend Wright was not wrong in what he said. And maybe, 10 years ago, you might not agree or might not even like what you heard in the readings and what I'm saying right now regarding Reverend Wright. You might call him a radical. But now, after the last decade of with a global pandemic, Black Lives Matter, police violence, all these guns, killings, black men, all this violence and hatred, I think many more of you are coming to realize that the system that we live under is unjust, unfair, and not equal to people of color. Not even fair for you. Amen. And if you're a woman today, you're feeling it. If you're a white man today, you're realizing that a lot of things you learned were lies. That the story of this nation is his story, not our story. If you're a trans person, you're feeling the hypocrisy. If you're a teenager, you're feeling the emotional angst with living in a world that seems more and more like some strange simulation. Many more have come to see that this world is very sick and that there are people in this world who cannot get out of their own way, who work in systems against their own best interest, who confuse justice with injustice because they fear multiculturalism. They watch these TV commercials and they're like, oh my God, what's going on in our country? And so they cling to old ideas that keep the world separate and unequal. And we must thank Mr. Trump. I'm serious. Because he has opened our eyes. He has opened our eyes to the two-tiered legal system in America that people of color have been talking about for decades. We've been telling you again and again, this country is not what it claims to be. We have said that the legal system and law enforcement oftentimes is unfair to us, and it is a game of whoever has the most power and money makes the rules. And so Mr. Trump has really become a trump card. And he has awakened you. He has angered you. I mean, the liberal media, and I love the liberal media. They're so smart, and they are just so perplexed. What's going to happen to our country? Democracy is doomed. If he doesn't suffer consequences for his actions, how will we survive? No, this injustice is just not new to me. It's not new to us. We've always known what Mr. Trump was. We've seen many like him. Not quite as bombastic. Same qualities. The same sly techniques to race bait and blame the victims in dominant culture. We knew from the jump, from the very beginning, he was a representation of the excesses within dominant culture. He represents the fragility and apathy and unchecked privilege that has always existed of what spoiled and rotten looks like. He is the epitome of the worst parts of white supremacy culture. Now your eyes are open. It's not pretty, is it? But that actually gives me hope. Maybe now we can work together in solidarity to finally create a just and fair system. We've known since Reconstruction in Tulsa and Jim Crow, Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matter, other moments, that there's this bait and switch process. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Tyranny of the minority. Reverend Wright was preaching to the choir in his sermon. His members understood exactly what he meant, and so did Obama, by the way, the future president, who was a member of that congregation. And it strikes me as ironic when those in power in the system start crying that the system is rigged. I mean, that is sleight of hand if I ever seen it. There are many more poor white people in this country than there are poor blacks by population. And they use this sleight of hand to tell them that we, people of color, are their enemies. They've been doing it for so long, and Dr. King even saw that. That's why he started the Poor People's Campaign. He caught on to it. He was in prison, probably in Birmingham, and he was just sitting around. I've told this story before, and he was talking to a white person in prison. And he said, "Hey, brother, how much you make?" The guy told him, I make something. "Man, what? That's it? Brother, you need to be marching with us." It's been that way for a long time. The bait and the switch. I love the president, President Obama and Michelle and the family. I can't imagine what he was going through during that time, having to give this speech betwixt and between. And he had to dig down to find and be his authentic self without compromising the larger goal of leading this country. I don't believe he wanted to denounce Reverend Wright. That was politics. And I did not agree with all that he said. You'll have to go back and read it again. But most of it I did agree with. I want to read some of what he said. I almost want to imitate his voice, but I'm not going to do it. We cannot solve the challenges of our time unless we solve them together, unless we perfect our union by understanding that we have many different stories, but we have common hopes. That we may not look the same, and we may not come from the same place, but we all want to move in the same direction towards a better future for our children and our grandchildren. Reverend Wright's views were divisive at a time when we need unity, racially charged at a time when we need to come together to solve a set of monumental problems. Problems that are neither black or white or Latino or Asian, but rather problems that confront us all. As imperfect as he may be, he has been like family to me. He strengthened my faith, officiated my wedding, and baptized my children. Not once in my conversations with him have I heard him talk about any ethnic group in derogatory terms, or treat whites with whom he interacted with anything but courtesy and respect. We do need to remind ourselves that so many of the disparities that exist between the African American community and the larger American community today can be traced directly to inequalities passed from an earlier generation that suffered under the brutal legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. It means continuing to insist on a full measure of justice in every aspect of American life, but it also means binding our particular grievances for better health care and better schools and better jobs to the larger aspirations of all Americans. The profound mistake of Reverend Wright's sermon is not that he spoke about racism in our society. It's that he spoke as if our society was static, as if no progress had been made. In the white community, the path to the more perfect union means acknowledging that what ails the African American community does not just exist in the minds of black people. It requires all Americans to realize that your dreams do not have to come at the expense of my dreams. That investing in the health, welfare, and education of black and brown and white children will ultimately help us all, end quote. These two great men, complex men, a complex time, both trying to be their authentic selves. And both were effective and persuasive in showing us that there's still a race problem in America. But because they spoke to different audiences, each had a different context and approach. Wright was unapologetically African American centric. Obama was more nationalistic, political, and universal in his approach. But both were naming the discrimination and unfair treatment of people of color historically in this nation. That two-tiered justice system for elites and for the rest of us was on full display when I went with our youth last week to Boston on their heritage trip. I had a great time. We have an awesome group of teens, and I want to thank Sarah Devlin Trimble for her leadership. Boston, it's a beautiful city. Boston is where the Puritans came in and set up shop. You know, Puritans are all about orderliness, harsh discipline. They believed that God was punitive, angry, so you had to do everything precisely, just right. That even shows up in the worship services, even today, that preciseness, that stiffness, and it's unforgiving. And that was considered proper in the 17 and 1800s. And that is our heritage. We are offshoots of these original Congregationalists. And Boston carries that air. It's not like New York, where the wheeling and dealing gets done, the money happens, you know, Hamilton, the room where it happened, where the economics happens. It's free-flowing, it's faster, but Boston is calmer, more reserved, more prestigious. You feel the wealth. You feel the old dusty money, the patriarchy. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautifully diverse city, and I love it. A lot of young people, a lot of great energy, but make no mistake about it, our forebears made a name for themselves, our Unitarian forebears particularly, in Boston. And they built all of these little mini cathedrals, gorgeous buildings. Today, most of them operate Monday through Friday like museums. They give tours. And they all have these big, huge Paul Revere's family sons built these bell towers, beautiful. We went up into the bell towers. We got to see the beautiful stainless glass windows, pictures of Bible stories, reminding all who enter that everyone in the Bible was white and not from the Middle East. They have these large endowments, $5, $10, $20 million. There won't be a person left in those churches, but they will still have a lot of money. And we got to go through the nooks and crannies and walk through and see the architectural structure. Interesting. The smell of old church is something that really is endearing to me. But then I started hearing hammers and sounds, and I could tell that I was listening to the sounds of my ancestors who built those cathedrals, and a bunch of poor white people who built those cathedrals, building someone else's image of God for them. And you know, it's interesting, again, it's gorgeous, but the pews, I'm glad we don't have pews, but the pews were like box seats, little doors, you know, and you had to pay for your pew back then. Only the rich got to sit on the floor. And, you know, they used to build little fires in the pews to keep warm. I don't know how those churches didn't burn down. I'm going to keep talking. I don't care what time it is. I got something to say. And then they had a section over here for the governor's seat. It was all laid out. It covered like, I don't know, this whole side over here. That was a governor's section. Now, if you were poor, you had to go stand in the balcony. Eventually, they built pews and you could sit in the balcony. But when we went up there, I realized that that was the best seat in the house. So I was like, a lot cheaper to sit up here. Because you can look right at the preacher because, you know, the pulpits are really high. I mean, they're clearly trying to tell you, I speak for God. Looking down on the people. But up in the balcony, you could throw a rock and hit the preacher if he was talking too long. Now, I don't want to disparage my colleagues who are still leading these churches. We went to a church on Sunday with the youth, and it was stiff. It was proper. It was, I felt, our Puritan tradition coming through. Honestly, it was dry as 3-day-old chicken breast. But it was good to see from which we come. And it's clear to me why we don't have racial diversity in our congregations. Right? You go to the origin, you're like, oh, I got it. That is in our DNA, our heritage of elites. Later, we got to walk down Newberry Street and Beacon Hill. Old money. Beautiful. Got to see William Ellery Channing's house. That kind of wealth carries a weight to it. And it's unapologetic and not modest. Everything is clean and cared for. It shows you the priorities of that city. Now, we didn't go to Roxbury. We didn't go to other parts where the poor folks live because there are no Unitarian stories over there. And that takes me right back to Reverend Wright and Obama. They were both right in what they said about America. Both were trying to be their authentic selves. We're trying to be our authentic selves as Unitarian Universalists, to be on the right side of history, to be embracers instead of erasers of truth and justice and love. But there are forces at play that like the world just the way it is. Forces at play in our congregations that like it just the way it is. And that's why we have the world that we have. Enough of us have not gotten uncomfortable with the segregated aspect of how we live. We are all complicit in this system because deep down inside, we still think we are better or want to be better than others. I'm talking to white folks and black folks. We are all guilty of this elitism. I get it, we all want to survive and thrive, but we must remember that elitism has been hammered into us by educational forces, parents, religious indoctrination. I learned growing up that white is right, if you're brown, turn around, if you're black, get back. A myth the elites directly or indirectly taught us. So we have work to do to remake America and Unitarian Universalism to become a new kind of culture that is not stuck in the past, but becomes vibrant and collaborative and forgiving, non-punitive. If we want a new world, we have to think differently about the things that we're doing, lest we continue to contribute to the same culture that has led us to where we are. Easier said than done, but we end and it's hard work. And we have to remain humble. Learn to trust. Learn to forgive. And not act like we have all the answers. That's what the Puritans did. And that's why the church as a whole in America is dying. We have to build a new way. We cannot be authentic as human beings until we are honest about this world that we've inherited and the faith that we have inherited in the family. I'm talking to myself. I like the nice suit I have on. But we need a change of heart. I'm almost done. That is not afraid of multiculturalism, not afraid of women being equal to men, not afraid of learning new pronouns, not fearful of brown people moving into your neighborhood, unafraid of gay or trans people, a heart not fearful of the future. I don't want you to throw a rock at me, so I'm going to finish here. How do we take the next step? There's several. I'm going to just give one because I'm out of time. May 12th and 13th, a dear friend, Paula Cole Jones, is coming here, talking about building a culture of inclusion, culture of diversity and inclusion in this congregation. We have 43 sign-ups, and we need 100, 200 sign-ups. And if you're not signed up, I get it if your schedule's busy. You get a pass. But if you're not signed up because you're uncomfortable, that's just not acceptable. Amen. I need you to sign up and come and participate and learn. That's the only way we're going to change this nation. When we get in our subconscious or in our brains a kind of compassion and love and less fear for people of color, they will just come without invitation because it's a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual thing. So I want you to sign up, please, today. That's our way forward, to build a new way, to do as Dr. King said, to make of this old world a new world, so that justice can roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Amen.